next we'll be starting with ICH. ICH stands for, do you know what is ICH? ICH guidelines are, ICH stands for International Conference of Harmonization, and ICH guidelines are given by the 3 member countries, that is Europe, US and Japan. The International Conference on Harmonization, ICH, good clinical practice guidelines were created to ensure the specific validity and reliability of the data obtained from human clinical trials, as well as to protect the rights of those who participate as human subjects in clinical trials. Okay, so these ICH guidelines, or ICH guidelines, so there are many guidelines which are given in ICH depending upon the divided into 4 particular sections. So one of the most commonly used guidelines from ICH, that is ICH GCP guideline, and these ICH GCP guideline is related to the conductment of clinical research process. Okay, so when in India also we are conducting the clinical research process, so instead of following Indian GCP, we are following ICH GCP, because following that the ICH GCP, if the data is obtained, that will also be considered in other countries, otherwise it won't be considered. So, okay, so that's why in India we are following, and we are following the ICH GCP guidelines. Okay, now there are other regulatory guidelines also which are followed in India, like ICMR guidelines, okay, WMA, Principles of Declaration of Helsinki, then we have New Drug Clinical Trial Rules 2019. So all those rules and regulations also we are following for conducting the clinical trial process in India. Okay, so guidelines were created to ensure, and these guidelines were created to ensure the scientific validity and the reliability of the data which is obtained from the human clinical studies, and also there is a principle, there is a provision for that investigator, it is the responsibility of the investigator to protect the right of those who participate as human subjects in the clinical trials. Then the guidelines guiding principle that is that the right, safety and well-being of the trial subject should take precedence over the interest of science and society. So now it is mentioned in WMA, that is World, in the Declaration of Helsinki also, it is mentioned that in the Declaration of Helsinki also it is mentioned that the experiment or the clinical trial process, whatever expenses is being done, is of no importance if the unnecessary harm to the human participants is being caused. So it is a responsibility of the investigator to protect or to ensure that the physical integrity and the right, safety and well-being of the patients or the participants is very important over the interest of science and society. The recommendation will have a significant and positive effect on clinical trials carried out in the 3 participating regions, that is US, European Union and Japan, as well as numerous other regions throughout the globe. So the major contributors of this ICH guidelines are US, Europe and Japan, and also there are many countries who are following these guidelines. Like for example, in our country, we are also following these guidelines, and we are following these guidelines. So whichever countries these guidelines are being followed, they have to do their they have to do the submission of the document, clinical trial process according to ICH GCP guidelines, and also they have to follow their local the guidelines which are given by their national authority. Okay, understood everyone? Is it clear? In the coming years, it should achieve its intended goal of enabling a more economical use of human, animal, and material sources, the removal of pointless delays in the global development and accessibility of new medicines, and the maintenance of regulatory obligations to safeguard public health while maintaining safeguards on quality, safety, and efficacy. So now in the coming years, the main aim of ICH, the main objective of the ICH to enable a more economical use of human, animal, and material resources, and unnecessary delays in the global development of any medicine, or whatever delays are there in the accessibility of the medicine, that can also be removed, the time can be shortened, and the maintenance of regulatory obligations to safeguard public health while maintaining safeguards on quality, safety, and efficacy should be maintained. So this is the work of a medical. Then The regulatory requirements for non-clinical safety evaluations are outlined in the International Conference on Harmonization ICH guidelines M3 with specialized guidelines ICH S1A to S10. So now the regulatory requirements for clinical safety evaluations, they are outlined in the ICH guidelines M3. So here we are concerned with the non-safety guidelines only, the non-clinical safety guidelines only, because we are discussing that here. With the specialized guidelines which are given from ICH S1A to ICH 10. The International Conference Council for Harmonization of Technical Use Requirements for Pharmaceutical and Human Use is unique in bringing together the regulatory authorities and pharmaceutical industry to discuss scientific and technical aspects of pharmaceuticals and develop ICH guidelines. So now these new guidelines are developed and old ones are when updated. So in that case, instead of discussing it with the international conference from the ICH, they have called a certain they have bring together. So they have bring together the regulatory authorities and the pharmaceutical industries so that they can discuss the technical issues or the scientific issues which they are facing. Okay. And then after that, the pharmaceutical and ICH guidelines may be developed. Now, these ICH topics are divided into 4 categories. Below are the ICH topic. Codes are assigned according to these categories, like quality guidelines, Q, safety guideline, S, efficacy guideline, E, and multidisciplinary guidelines, M. So quality guidelines are providing the quality. It is providing the list of the analysis which are to be conducted on the finished product to ensure its credibility and identity. Then so there are the testing guidelines, stability, not the stability, but there are various testing guidelines, contamination and all. The next is the safety guidelines. So safety guidelines are the guidelines which are followed for conducting the preclinical study. So for each procedure, there is a separate guideline which you have to follow for conducting the clinical studies in the laboratory, preclinical studies. Then efficacy guidelines are related to clinical research process, where all the information about that why the clinical research is to be conducted, why, in what conditions is to be stopped. Then what are the guidelines which are followed, like ICH GCP guideline is there, which are to be followed for conducting the clinical trial process. Then you have the pharmacovigilance documents also, which are uploaded there. Okay, and then you have certain other, like content of the documents, like content of DSUR, PSUR, CSR. So all these contents are also very well described in the efficacy guidelines. Then multidisciplinary guidelines are the guidelines which do not fit in any of the above categories. So they are kept in the miscellaneous guidelines. Okay. So first we'll discuss about the quality guidelines. So quality guidelines, as they are not in your syllabus because they are not related to medical writing at all. So I'll just discuss it very quickly. The performance of stability studies establishing appropriate threshold for impurity testing and a more flexible approach to pharmaceutical quality based on good manufacturing practice, GMP, risk management, all are significant milestones in the harmonization of the quality domain. So the quality guidelines, they contain the information about the stability studies, GMP guidelines, and all risk management guidelines. Like Q1A to Q1F is related to stability guidelines. Q2 guidelines are related to analytical validation. Q3A to Q3E, it is related to impurities, testing of impurities. Then Q4A to Q4B contains the information about various pharmacopoeias. Then Q5A to Q4E is related to how the quality of the biotechnological products can be maintained. Q6A to Q6B are the guidelines related to the quality related specifications. Then Q7 guidelines are related to good manufacturing practice. Q8 guidelines are related to the development of a pharmaceutical product. Then Q9 guidelines are related to QRM, quality risk management. Q10 guidelines are related to pharmaceutical quality management. Q11 guidelines are related to development and manufacture of drug substances. And Q12 guidelines are related to life cycle management. Okay, so these are the various guidelines which are these are the specific guidelines which are followed for ensuring the quality and purity of the product which is manufactured in a pharmaceutical company. Next are the safety guidelines. So these are the guidelines which are related to non-clinical studies which are conducted. So ICH has produced a comprehensive set of safety guidelines to uncover potential risks like carcinogenicity, genotoxicity, and reproductive toxicity. So there are various studies which are done, like the carcinogenicity studies are done. So now I will just give you an overview of preclinical studies, like what or all studies are being conducted. So first of all, preclinical studies, we all know that preclinical studies are the studies which are conducted to get more knowledge about the safety and efficacy of the drug. Okay, so there are two types of studies which are conducted, that is pharmacological studies and toxicological studies. Okay, so pharmacological studies, they consist of pharmacodynamics and pharmacokinetics. In pharmacodynamics, we study about the mechanism of action of the drug, and also with what affinity the drug is binding with the receptor. Okay, and then in pharmacokinetic studies, we study about the absorption, distribution, metabolism, and excretion of the drug, like how the drug is getting absorbed, distributed, metabolized, what are the biotransformation reaction the drug is undergoing, and whether it leads to the formation of active or inactive metabolites. Then then what is the role of these metabolites, whether they are toxic or not, they are not toxic. And also the excretion, means how the drug is getting excreted out from the body. Okay, then next then after that we the toxicology studies are conducted. So toxicology studies, they are of four types. First is acute toxicity studies, then subacute toxicity studies, chronic toxicity studies, and special toxicity studies. Okay, so in acute, subacute, and chronic toxicity studies, say like acute and subacute toxicity studies, we used to study the what is the side effects, adverse effects of the drug, and the dose, in the optimum dose which is administered to the animals, and also the histopathological screening is also done. Means in the subacute toxicity studies, the animals are sacrificed, and their tissues are checked, like whether the tissues which have been, the tissues are checked, so whether these tissues which are developed, they are damaged or not, whether there is any development of any neoplastic liaison or not, so that is checked. Then chronic toxicity studies are conducted to get knowledge about, like when the drug is administered for a longer period of time, that is for more than 6 months of time. So maybe because the drug is administered for a very long period, maybe it may lead to the development of various development of any long-term side effects. Then there are certain special toxicity studies which are conducted, and these special toxicity studies are reproductive toxicity studies, to see the effect of the drug on the reproductive organ, whether it is affecting the male fertility or any effect on the reproductive organ of male and females. Then the carcinogenicity studies are conducted to see that whether the drug is, any metabolite of the drug is carcinogen or not. And carcinogenicity studies are also conducted for the drugs which are to be administered for more than 6 months of time continuously. Okay, then after that, mutagenicity studies are conducted and genotoxicity studies are conducted to see the effect of the drug on whether it is lead to the development of any mutagenicity or mutagenesis in the cell or in the body or not. Then the local toxicity studies are conducted, phototoxicity studies are conducted, allergic studies are conducted to see that whether any allergic effect of the drug is seen or not. Phototoxicity studies are conducted generally to see the effect of the drug during for the effect of any dermal preparation, whether it is leading to any kind of rashes, inflammation, or any kind of allergic reaction. Okay, so these are the various special toxicity studies which are conducted on animals during the preclinical testing. And for conducting all these studies, there are guidelines which are followed, which are given by ICH, which is covered under the safety guidelines of ICH. Okay, so okay, so understood everyone? Is it clear what are the preclinical studies which are conducted on animals during the preclinical phase. Is it clear? So now ICH has produced a comprehensive set of safety guidelines to uncover potential risks like carcinogenicity, genotoxicity, and reprotoxicity or reproductive toxicity. A recent breakthrough has been a non-clinical testing strategy for assessing the quality interval, QT interval prolongation liability, like what is the effect of the drug on the heart rate and all, the single most important cause of drug withdrawal in recent years, because the drugs are having a very adverse effect on the heart, which we have most frequently seen in case of COVID, at the time of COVID, when the drugs were taken like corticosteroids and all steroids, they have been without any regulation and restrictions, they have been administered to the patients, and which lead to development of some heart related conditions. So S1 to S1C guidelines, they are related to carcinogenicity studies. Okay, so like how the carcinogenicity studies will be conducted, what is the dose which is to be used for the which is given for the carcinogenicity studies, and also what is the and also it is discussed that what are the in what condition the carcinogenicity studies are important to be conducted on animals. Then S2 guidelines are related to genotoxicity studies, where how these genotoxicity studies are conducted against a standard or a reference that is given. Then S3A and S3B guidelines are related to toxicokinetics and pharmacokinetics. So these studies are conducted to understand that how the pharmacokinetics are related to, or the distribution of the drug or the metabolization of the drug can lead to the development of any adverse event. And similarly with the toxicokinetics too, so for any toxic effect, we in this studies it is tried to understand that whether this particular adverse effect is related to the development of any kind of toxicity, or it is related to any kind of pharmacokinetic processes or not. Then S4 guidelines are related to toxicity testing of related to the toxicity testing of toxicity testing, which is related to the use of the drug for a longer period of time. Okay, then S5s are related to reproductive toxicity, means like what are the studies, it contains information about the studies, like how and when these studies are to be conducted, like these studies are to be conducted before the mating period, and then after that the mating period after that the behavior of the mating period of the animals is being assessed, that how they are behaving, and what is the effect of the male on the male, what is the effect of the drug on the male fertility. So that is also being assessed. The next is S6 guidelines. So S6 guidelines are related to biotechnological products, like what are the studies which are to be conducted on the biotechnologically derived products, like the biological products, for example vaccines, cytokines and all. Then S1A and S1B guidelines are related to pharmacology studies, in which the major side effects related to the drug, and also we study about the drugs which leads to the QT prolongation. So QT interval is a interval in the ECG wave. In case if you have seen a ECG wave, I'll just show you. So I'll just make a rough diagram. This may not be the exact ECG wave, but it is somewhat like this. And these peaks are given the name as P, Q, R, S, and T. Okay, so it is, I'm not confirmed that it is exactly the wave, ECG wave I've made, but it is somewhat like this. And this prolongation of QT intervals, which depicts the ventricular repolarization, may lead to various conditions of heart disease like arrhythmia or cardiac arrest or heart attack. So for this particular in that is also studied, that whether the drug is interfering with the normal functioning of the heart or not. Then non-clinical immuno S8 guidelines are related to immunotoxicology studies, means if any drug which leads to which lowers the immunity or which enhances the immunity, generally when in case of lowering of the immunity, that study is done. So if the drug lowers the immunity, then in that case the body become more susceptible to infections, and also it may lead to the development of any and they also gives development to a tumorigenic potential. Then S9 guidelines are non-clinical evaluation of anti-cancer pharmaceuticals. So anti-cancer pharmaceuticals are the drugs which are used in the treatment of cancer, like any type of cancer and at any stage, that is known as anti-cancer pharmaceuticals. And the studies are conducted to see or to expedite the development of anti-cancer pharmaceuticals with lesser side effects, so that the unnecessary harm or unnecessary injuries which are occurring to the participants or to the patients who are suffering from cancer and are on anti-cancer pharmaceuticals, but they suffer from various side effects, so that it becomes very difficult to them to cope up with the situation. Then S10 guidelines are related to photo safety evaluation. So photo safety evaluation means the drugs which are generally the dermal preparations when they are applied on the skin. So as such, when you are in a dark place, you're at your home, it will not have any adverse effect. But as you move outside and the body is exposed to sun, a certain kind of allergy or inflammation, redness is developed. So that means there are certain ingredients which are added in the formulation or a drug, it is photosensitive. Then S11 is non-clinical pediatric study. So non-clinical pediatric studies are the studies which are conducted, pediatric studies. So this guideline which will provide the information that why it is necessary to conduct the pediatric studies on the pediatric study, and also like when the pediatric studies are to be conducted on humans, then in that case in the preclinical studies also the juvenile animals are considered for the preclinical studies. Then S12 guidelines. So S12 guidelines are non-clinical biodistribution considerations for gene therapy products. So now the gene therapy products, the products which are used in gene therapy, the vector and all. So what is the biodistribution considerations for these gene therapy products? That is being studied in S12 guidelines. Then you have efficacy guidelines. So efficacy guidelines are mostly related to the pharmacovigilance or clinical research. So the efficacy section of the ICH work focuses on the planning, execution, safety, and reporting of the clinical studies. As I said, it is related to the procedure of clinical research. Additionally, it discusses the development of innovative pharmaceuticals through biotechnological procedures, as well as the use of biogenetics and pharmacogenomics to the development of more precise pharmaceuticals. Like even guidelines are related to clinical safety for drug used in long-term treatment. Okay, the drugs which can used in the long-term treatment. So what is the clinical safety? Then E2A to E2F guidelines are related to pharmacovigilance. Okay, then E3 guidelines are related to the contents and format of clinical study report. E4 guidelines are related to dose response studies. Then E5 guidelines are related to ethnic factors which are to be considered while the clinical studies are conducted. Then E6 guidelines are the GCP, ICH GCP guidelines, in which how the clinical trials will be conducted. Then E7 guidelines are clinical trials in geriatric population, like in what condition it is and what are the precautions or which is to be taken when the clinical trials are to be conducted in geriatric population and the older elderly patients. Then E8 are general considerations for clinical trials, like how these clinical trials will be conducted, what are the general considerations while conducting the clinical trial process. E9 guidelines are related to statistical principles for clinical trials, means how this statistical analysis plan is made, what are the statistical principles which are to be considered when conducting the clinical trial process and when analyzing the data which is obtained from the clinical trials. Then E10 guidelines are related to choice of control groups in clinical trials. So how the control group, like in the randomized trial, there is a control group which is used. So in that case, how that control group can be chosen, which is to be considered for what type of clinical trials, what type of clinical control group can be considered. Then E11 and E11A guidelines are related to clinical trials in pediatric population, like in what condition conducting of clinical trials with pediatric population is necessary, and also what are the extra precautions which are to be taken, because pediatric population are considered as the a vulnerable population as per ICMR. So hence there are special precautions which are to be taken, and only when it is very much required, then in that case only the geriatric or pediatric population will be considered for the study. Then E12 guidelines are related to clinical evaluation by therapeutic category. So how the clinical evaluation of the drugs are done according to the therapeutic category to which they belong. E14 guidelines are related to clinical evaluation of QT interval, the same which we have discussed. Then E15 guidelines are related to definitions of pharmacogenetics and pharmacogenomics. Like pharmacogenomics is a newer field which is introduced and which is also under study, where the medicines will be designed as per the genetic makeup of the individual. Then E16 guidelines are related to qualification of genomic biomarkers. So any genomic studies or any genomic studies are to be conducted, then what are the genomic biomarkers which are used? Then E17 guidelines are related to multi-regional clinical trials. So if the clinical trial process are to be conducted at multiple sites, which is maybe in different countries or maybe in a single country, but at different places, where the population subgroups, they have a different demographic characteristics, they belong to a different community or a different race. So in that case, what are the multi-regional clinical trial guidelines are to be followed? Then E18 guidelines are related to genomic sampling. Okay, how the genomic sampling is done for the genomic studies. Then E19 guidelines are related to safety data collection. Okay, like how in the clinical trial process, with the clinical trial process, how the data can be collected safely. Then E20 guidelines are related to adaptive clinical trials. Okay, so these adaptive clinical trials are the clinical trials which, maybe in some other country, the clinical trials are already conducted, and now we are importing that product in our country. So that is then E21 guidelines are related to inclusion of pregnant and breastfeeding individuals in clinical trials, like in what condition it is required, or under what condition, what are the precautions which is to be taken when a pregnant or a breastfeeding woman is included in a clinical trial process. So now, as we are discussing the preclinical studies. So here you are concerned with only the safety guidelines. Then you have multidisciplinary guidelines. So multidisciplinary or miscellaneous guidelines are the guidelines which does not follow in any of the above category, that is safety, efficacy, and quality. Okay, so these are the topics that cut across all three of the other categories, quality, safety, and efficacy, and do not fit neatly into any one of them. It includes the creation of electronic standards for the transfer of regulatory information and common technical documents, CTD, and ICH medical terminology, that is MEDRA, which is a dictionary. So M1 guideline is a MEDRA dictionary which explains the medical terminology. Then M2 guidelines are related to electronic standards which are to be followed while submitting the data electronically. Then M3 guidelines are related to non-clinical safety studies, like what are the necessary non-clinical safety studies which are to be conducted without jeopardizing the safety and efficacy of the drug. So for what type of drugs, what are the non-clinical studies which are necessary to be conducted? Then M4 guidelines are related to common technical document, which will give you an overview of the common technical document. What are the dossiers, like what are the modules which are there in a common technical document. Then M5 guidelines are related to data elements and standards for drug dictionaries. Then M6 guidelines are related to gene therapy. And these are the other M guidelines. M7, like what are the mutagenic impurities which are related, which can lead to the development of a mutagenesis in the body, which can be the adverse effect of a drug. Then M8 guidelines are related to electronic ECTD, like this a common technical document can also be submitted electronically. So what are the guidelines which are to be followed? Then M9 guidelines are related to biopharmaceutical classification system, BCS, like how the biopharmaceutical products are classified. So biopharmaceutical products are the products which are developed using the biotechnological methods, like vaccine, hormones, cytokines, which are used for one or the other treatment. Then M10 guidelines are bioanalytical method validation and study sample analysis. Then 11 are clinical electronic structured harmonized protocol. So detailed information about all these guidelines if you're interested. And in case if you come across any of the project or any work where you have to use these guidelines, or where you have to go through these guidelines, so easily you can visit on the ICH website and then you can select. So I'll show you that how you can get access to these guidelines. Okay, so and I will show you the ICH website, and I will also show you that how you can get access to these ICH guidelines, various ICH guidelines. Okay, so the web address of ICH website is ich.org. Okay, and here you can see the 4 letters are written Q, S, E, and M. So Q is for quality guidelines, S is for safety guidelines, E is for efficacy guidelines, and M is for multidisciplinary guidelines. So suppose if you want to see the safety guidelines, so what you can do is you can click here on S. Okay, so the safety guidelines will open, and now you can, suppose if you want to see the toxicity testing, so you click here. Now duration of chronic toxicity testing in animals, rodent and non-rodent toxicity testing. So then you click here on this. Okay, so now the guidelines will open. This is a PDF of this guideline. So you can click on this PDF, S4 guideline PDF. Okay, and then after that you can see that these guidelines will open. Okay, so like this, these guidelines will open, the PDF copy. So if you want, you can save it, you can access them anytime, whenever you want. So in case anytime if you'll come across, like if you feel like, because nobody, of course, nobody can remember these guidelines. Okay, so if you want, if you can come across these guidelines, if you want to use these guidelines in any of your writing part, or if you feel like that you want to use these guidelines, so in that case what you can do is you can just open these guidelines, and like from the ICH website you can access these guidelines. Okay,
Ma'am, sometimes these guidelines are under revision. So how we come to know, like
from the website only. Sometimes what happens, if their guidelines are under revision, so if you click on this PDF, it won't open. Okay, it won't open. So, and there will be a notification sometimes also flashed on the screen that these guidelines are under revision, so they will be temporarily available, and when they will be revised, they will again become available. Okay, yeah, they obsolete the old one. Now only the new one will be available. Maybe in the new one only they will in that only they will specify that what are the amendments which are done. Okay,